푸틴 동지와 감격적인 상봉을 하셨습니다. 김정은 동 금치 못하시면서 구두 낙수를 나누시고 뜨겁게 포옹하셨습니다. 러시아 연방 대통령 대외정책 담당 보좌관 유리 우샤코브 동지, 국방스레이 벨로우소브 동지, 자연부원 생태학상 겸 로저 정부 간 무역 경제.
This is a fascinating, almost reverse take on the normal power battles that we tend to see between world leaders when they meet together and try and establish their own alpha dominance. Getting into their car, it actually created one of those moments of almost polite clumsiness that you tend to get on a first date. So we had Kim and Putin both urging the other to climb into the car first. There were at least 5 directional rituals with the arm, which kind of converted into a power battle as to no, I'm going to be the one that's going to decide who's going to get in first. And clearly Putin lost that particular battle because Kim not only gesticulated and emphatically and very firmly gesticulated for Putin to get in first, albeit politely. There was that definitive pat on the back that is called the power pat that actually made the decision that no, Putin, you're going to get in. This I'm the host. So he looked like the more dominant, albeit polite, albeit hugely ingratiating, albeit looking like a giggly first date. It was very much showed who was in charge at that point. A lot of the body language here was clearly deliberate display, even boastful rituals. I mean, I've described it as boasting about a leadership bromance, a political bromance. More Kim Kardashian than Kim Jong-un. It's made even more emphatic in terms of the signalling by the fact that this tactile display that we've seen so far throughout their meeting together. These PDAs are not part of the cultural norm for either of them. They would normally be restricted to perhaps a polite handshake. When Trump met Kim Jong-un, it was a handshake. It was quite close body language. There were a lot of smiling, but it didn't get to the point that this relationship has. Even the greeting ritual, which is always hugely important in terms of a signal on the world stage. Kim Jong-un rolled out literally the red carpet. He performed what's called an act of inconvenience, which means that the more you want to show that you're honouring your guest, the more you put yourself out. So he was literally waiting on the tarmac for Putin as Putin kind of skipped off the plane. And then we got this very strange greeting ritual from them. And again, led by the North Korean leader. I mean, Putin would normally just about do a handshake, but the handshake was converted and that would be a power gesture. The hand round the arm, it turned into a kiss on both cheeks and a partial hug, which hugely tactile. But as I say, very much dominated by Kim Jong-un. And it was very interesting because Putin was clearly delighted. You can see his cheeks rounding. He's absolutely loving it. He's laughing as they're having a discussion. But then he wants to reassert his own authority by instigating a similar gesture. And we can see him leaning forward and trying to put his arm around Kim's neck, but it kind of politely gets rebuffed. So it's kind of, no, that's it. You've had your lot now. The signals, particularly once they got inside and were sitting at the table, they're sitting opposite one another. So there isn't actually a power seat at that point. But we are being shown very much that this is a signal of unity. You can see with the eye contact that goes on, I think we need to remember that the conversation's having to be translated, but they're both being very polite and nodding as though they understand what's going on and using very involved eye contact. Putin was actually throwing out a crinkled eye smile, looking almost fond of the North Korean leader at that point. And you can see his legs below the table are doing small pumping movements, which would be a sign of genuine pleasure. That's not even being acted out. That is the genuine thing, because that to him would be less visible than the facial expression. So it's all a display of unity. It's a display of bonding. It's a display of like-minded thinking. And hugely, hugely emphatic, probably more so than I've seen from any other world leaders to date.
필패성과 공고성을 다시금 들여신의 분들의 또 한 차례의 역사.
I think a lot of this is really meant to, upgrade the relationship and demonstrate that the relationship is deepening. We saw even back in January when North Korean Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee had gone to Russia. She had talked about really building and expanding the legal basis for their cooperation. And I think the expectation here now, and especially coming from Russian press, is that there will be a treaty signed, upgrade the relationship, and then, and likely to expand the level of cooperation and include some security components within that treaty. They have a common problem, and that is sanctions. And Putin has really been leading what he considers and what he deems the war on the West and trying to create a multipolar system and sort of upend or create an alternative to a US-led world order.
The deepening cooperation between Russia and the DPRK is something that should be of concern, especially to anyone that's interested in maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, but also supporting the people of Ukraine as they continue to fight against Russian aggression. And so, of course, you're well aware of DPRK providing ammunition and weapons to Russia that's been able to help them perpetuate their illegal and unprovoked war against the Ukrainian people. So it's something that we're going to continue to keep an eye on. I would say, though, taking a step back, our focus when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region and the Korean Peninsula is on working with allies and partners to promote peace, stability, and security in the region, and that will continue to be our focus.
Both have really been stalwart in their moral support for each other's endeavors against the international community and against international law. But, there is a military component to this as well. And so, Russia's the first country basically since the collapse of the Soviet Union that's been willing to offer North Korea, military cooperation. And so this does give North Korea opportunities to upgrade their hardware in their conventional side, as well as their military reconnaissance satellites and their space programs, which Russia has said openly that they'd be willing to do. And then the big questions, of course, are whether Russia is willing to help in the WMD side. Based on statements that the Russians have made, including Putin himself and other top Russian officials, they seem to have accepted North Korea as a nuclear armed state and accepted the program as there to stay. At the same time, they do still, parrot language about not violating international law and upholding sanctions on some level. And I think some of the statements that have come out of Russian media just in the last 24 hours have mentioned that any treaty is going to uphold international law.